Some pain doesn't scream. It doesn't show up in a cast or bleed or break the skin. It lives underneath, quiet, slow burning, and invisible. And when no one sees it, it doesn't just hurt, it isolates. Because the deeper wound isn't just the pain itself, it's the loneliness of carrying it alone. See, we often talk about trauma in terms of what happened, but some of the deepest pain comes from what didn't happen, what didn't get asked, right? Or what didn't get noticed, what wasn't held or witnessed. See, you can grow up in a loving household and still feel unseen. You can be surrounded by friends and still feel like no one has really looked you in the eye and said, I know that hurts. See, unacknowledged pain, it has this way of hollowing out the inside of a person. It becomes this quiet narrative that's playing in the background. You're too much. You're not enough. If it really mattered, someone would have noticed, right? And when no one does, we begin to believe the lie that maybe it didn't actually matter at all. But it did matter. That memory that you carry, the one where you felt dismissed, right? Or where you felt betrayed or left out. It shaped something inside of you. It taught you something about the world and about yourself in relation to that world. And if no one ever helped you unpack it, you probably built this way of coping around it instead. You learned how to shrink or deflect or numb. You may have even learned how to make everyone else comfortable, as long as it meant that no one would have to feel your discomfort, including you. See, I think we all have these quiet and exiled parts of us, right? Parts that once reached out and weren't met. So they stopped reaching out altogether, and they still live inside of us still. And they show up in our relationships, in ways that we second guess ourselves, in the way that we tell our stories with half-truths, because the full truth feels far too heavy to offer anyone. I remember the way that I used to try and make up for what I lacked, socially, emotionally, and even physically, by performing. Not as a stage act, but as someone who had learned to read a room faster than I could read a book. And I studied what people liked, what made them feel comfortable. And then I contorted myself to match that. And it earned me praise. It got me invited in, but it wasn't me that they were accepting though. It was this version that was easiest to digest. And it took years before I even realized the cost of hiding my pain wasn't just that others didn't know me. It was that I didn't even know myself. And the real tragedy of unacknowledged pain is it doesn't just separate us from others, it also fragments our own sense of being. And here's the thing. Sometimes it's not even malicious that the people around us aren't seeing our pain. It's their own overwhelm, perhaps, their own denial, their own inability to hold space for our complexity. So instead of presence, we get platitudes. Instead of curiosity, we usually get advice. And instead of connection, we get correction. And that's the moment that we stop talking. That's the moment that we tuck it all away and then tell ourselves, maybe I'll just deal with this in my own way. And so many of us are walking around with these stories that have never actually been told out loud. And it's not because we didn't want to, but more so because the first few times that we tried, we got met with something that told us it was safer not to tell it. It was maybe a furrowed brow or a quick subject change, a well-meaning, look on the bright side kind of a response. And that's all that it took. And yet we long deeply to be known, not just for our talents and our triumphs, but also for the pain beneath the smile, for the moments that we were 8 years old and we were crying in our room and no one came, for the day that we lost something that we couldn't quite name. and everyone just kept on moving as if nothing had happened. When no one named that, right? That pain became this ghost. It was always present, but never really acknowledged. And it shows up even in our adult lives in ways that confuse us, right? We overreact, we underreact, we sabotage or something that's good, and we cling tightly to the harmful things. And we build these fortresses and we call them strength. But what we really want, or what we've always wanted, is just someone who sees through the fortress and says, you don't have to carry this alone anymore. There's something especially destabilizing about pain that doesn't get mirrored back to us. Not just pain that's misunderstood or dismissed, but pain that's completely invisible to people who claim to care about this, right? It's not just hurt, it's this erasure. And so we begin to wonder what we're feeling, is it even real? Or is it just us being dramatic? We second guess our own story, we minimize the weight of our wounds in our minds. We downplay the pain in front of others until eventually we even start doing it in front of ourselves as well. This, I think, is how emotional isolation calcifies. Not necessarily through absence, but more so through misattunement. People might be around us, yes, but if no one is seeing the truth of our experience, our pain becomes solitary confinement of our soul. And for me, that confinement, it took root during childhood in these subtle and invisible ways. I was told that social time and playtime and the chance to meet with others and connect, those were rewards for me to earn. And I was average academically. I didn't really stand out. I didn't impress because that was my gift. And because of this, I was consistently excluded from social opportunities that so many of my peers took for granted. And at that age, I didn't really have the language to understand what was happening. I only knew that I wasn't invited. I wasn't chosen, and I wasn't allowed to say how much it hurts. So I gave excuses, half-hearted explanations for why I couldn't join or why I wasn't around or why I was on the outside looking in. Because to admit the truth, that the truth was I felt inferior and unwanted, that felt really unbearable to confess. It's strange how deeply these early emotional injuries embed themselves in our nervous systems, right? Years later, even in rooms full of warmth and welcome, I'd still feel that ancient pain of exclusion echoing in my body, the ache of being left out, of being overlooked, of not measuring up. I carried that into adulthood in these subtle and not so subtle ways. I learned how to hide the parts of me that felt unworthy. I got really good at sounding okay. I became skilled at presenting strength, even when I felt hollow. And when others told me that I seemed so confident, I'd nod politely, while inwardly someone would ask a deeper question that I couldn't answer. Because here's the thing that most people didn't realize. When someone is carrying pain that no one else acknowledges, they usually get very good at pretending that it's not there. And oftentimes they don't even know they're doing it. It becomes this habit to show up polished, to keep things light, right? To deflect conversations when they get too close to the edge. Not because they're hiding something malicious, but more so because the last time that they brought their pain to the table, no one stayed long enough to hold them or be with them through that. Or worse, people would just walk away or shrug it off or use toxic positivity to minimize it, saying, it's not that bad. You've got to be grateful for what you have, right? Or everything happens for a reason. See, these responses are often well-meaning, but they land with knives, don't they? Not because they're overtly cruel, but because they betray a refusal to sit in the discomfort of another person's reality. And when that happens enough times, when someone's pain is repeatedly met with redirection or dismissal or these light platitudes, it sends a deeper message. Your experience is too much, or worse, it doesn't really matter. And that's where the isolation deepens. Not just emotional distance from others, but also this internal split between what we feel and what we're allowed to show. And that split can become a prison. See, you learn to self-monitor, to second-guess yourself. Even the moments of vulnerability that you want to experience, you're like, I don't know, am I being too needy? Am I being too much? Am I being, just emotional? So you minimize and you perform and you work twice as hard just to be okay, so that no one has to be inconvenienced by your reality. But underneath, there's this persistent ache. One that says, if someone would just see me, perhaps I wouldn't feel so alone. And here's what makes it even worse. The world is often so full of distractions and urgency and noise, and people, they don't always mean to overlook us, right? They're usually busy and they're wrapped up in their own life and their own pain. And they might actually not notice that you're carrying something very heavy because they've never actually slowed down enough to ask, or because they often just presume that you're fine. And if you've spent years getting good at hiding your pain, they may have no way of knowing that anything is wrong. This is why I'm so committed to building spaces like here at Bintegers, where people can be seen in their full selves, not just in their strength or their achievements, but also in their hurt and their confusion, where you don't have to sanitize your story in order to be welcomed in, where what is hidden can actually be brought to the light and honored. Because I know what it feels like to walk through a season of inner unraveling while everyone else seems to have moved on blissfully unaware. I know what it's like to have that pain of acknowledgement that isn't recognized because sometimes the most healing thing in the world is to hear someone just say, I see you, and what you're carrying really matters. See, you'd be surprised how rare that kind of acknowledgement really is, and how powerful it is. Some people spend their whole lives just waiting for it. And in the meantime, they build these elaborate emotional strategies to cope with absence. And some people just turn their pain inward, believing the lie that they have to be defective for feeling what they feel, right? Others externalize it. They project blame, or they build walls, or they become reactive or cynical in order to protect themselves from the vulnerability of these unacknowledged wounds. And still others go quiet. They withdraw. They become ghosts in their own lives. Present, yes, but not fully alive. Engaged in emotions, but not really connected to their own hearts. And all of this comes at a cost. Because when we lose touch with our pain, we also lose touch with our capacity for feeling and experiencing joy. See, numbness doesn't discriminate. It doesn't just protect us from the hurt. It also mutes our ability to feel wonder and beauty and connection. So what's the way back? It begins with this truth. Your pain is real, even if no one else acknowledges it. And you don't need outside validation for your story to actually matter. But you do need safe spaces where your inner world can be honored. Not fixed, not hurried, and not even bypassed, but just honored for what it is. You need relationships that don't flinch when your truth comes out to the forefront. You need people who can say, I may not understand everything that you've been through, but I want you to know that I'm here with you. and I'm not afraid of your mess. Those kind of relationships are rare, but they're not mythical. They're built patiently and intentionally, and often imperfectly, by people who are willing to do the work of integrity and intimacy. People who are willing to be honest about their own pain so that they can also hold space for yours. And if you have those kinds of people in your life, or let's say if you don't have anyone like that in your life yet, I want to remind you this. You are still worthy of being known, not for the version of you that others find convenient or pleasant or negotiable, but for the version of you that feels vulnerability and that rawness and that complexity that is hard to explain. That version of you matters most. And if you've actually gone years and maybe even decades carrying this private weight, feeling like no one ever really acknowledged what you've endured, I want you to know this. You're not invisible here. You don't have to keep carrying that pain alone. See, one of the most brutal outcomes of unacknowledged pain is how it teaches you to doubt yourself. It's not just that others don't see your wound. It's more so that you begin to even wonder whether the wound is even valid, whether it was ever there, whether you were just imagining the whole thing. And so instead of tending to the injury, you start policing your own emotions. You start reprimanding yourself for still feeling this thing years later. And you try to get over it before you've even had a chance to move through it. And you demand resilience when what you really need is a reckoning. See, this is the emotional violence that silence can cause. Not the silence of solitude, but the silence of dismissal. Of being surrounded by people who care about you on the surface, but they have no capacity or willingness to meet you in the deeper places where you're at. They might love the version of you that smiles on you, that nods politely, that keeps the conversation light and unmessy. But they usually go blank or feel uncomfortable or even defensive when the real you begins to show up, the one who's still carrying the pain that no one's ever asked about. And so to survive, you shrink and you compartmentalize and you learn how to become agreeable and pleasant and efficient and competent, anything but a burden. And in that process, part of your soul begins to feel unreachable, not just to others, but to yourself. See, I've talked to so many people who are walking around in this way. They're functioning, they're smiling, they're showing up to work and birthdays and weekend plans. And yet quietly, they're harboring this deep sense of disconnection from their own inner life. Why is this? Because no one ever taught them how to stay with their pain. No one ever said, it's okay to feel this. You don't have to apologize for hurting. You don't have to downplay what you've been through. And without that kind of permission, especially in the formative years, many people learn to abandon themselves emotionally, to override their own needs, right? To neglect their own stories. And eventually that emotional neglect becomes second nature. They become the friend who's always there for others, but they never ask for anything in return. They become the employee who takes on too much because setting boundaries, that feels selfish, right? They become the partner who avoids conflict at all costs because they never were taught how to bring their truth forward and still be loved. And underneath all of this is that same unacknowledged pain. It's still alive, it's still unprocessed, it's still waiting to be seen and witnessed. It's easy to pathologize people for these patterns, right? To say they have attachment issues or they're low self-esteem. Before we reduce someone, though, to a label, I think we need to ask, what have they survived? I think we need to consider the emotional landscape that shaped them. And more often, what I think we'll find is that they were carrying pain that no one in their life had ever stopped to acknowledge or witness. And so they learned to carry this quietly. And while that quiet may have looked like composure or strength or resilience, it was often a mask of deep loneliness, a yearning not just to be loved, but to be understood. Because being loved is not the same as being known, right? Being tolerated is not the same as being seen. And being included is not the same as being understood in your fullness, especially in those places that hurt. So, what does it look like to begin undoing this emotional erasing? It begins with slowing down, with tuning in, with listening, not to the outer noise, but to your inner pulse, to the part of you that's still in pain and still hungry for recognition. Maybe it's the part of you that's been grieving a loss that no one has ever noticed, right? Maybe it's the part of you that still flinches when you're left out, because childhood rejection had left deeper marks than you'd ever realized. Perhaps it's that part of you that actually craves touch, but feels ashamed for that longing. Or maybe it's the part that never actually truly exhaled because your body still carries this weight of unspoken stories. Whatever it is from your unacknowledged pain, it is not a liability. It's not a sign of failure. And it's not something to be hidden or apologized for. Are you hearing me? What it is it's a doorway or a portal to a deeper truth of who you are. And the more that you allow yourself to be honest about what still hurts, even if no one else in your life is asking about it, the more you're able to come home to yourself. See, this is why integrity and intimacy matter so deeply. Because integrity isn't just about perfection. Integrity is more about alignment, about living in a way that doesn't force you to deny your reality, about honoring what's true inside of you, even when it's messy or inconvenient. And intimacy isn't just about closeness with others, it's more about closeness with yourself, about seeing into your own experiences with tenderness and curiosity and compassion. And when you stop waiting for someone else to validate your pain and instead begin witnessing it for yourself, that's when I think real healing starts. Not because you're doing it alone forever, but because you're no longer holding yourself hostage to someone else's permission. You can still long for connection, and you can still long for understanding. And you don't have to wait for it to begin treating yourself and your own story as sacred. And when you start doing that, when you start acknowledging your pain as valid, even if no one else has ever done so, you begin creating these conditions for true intimacy to grow. And when someone finally does come along who's capable of seeing you in your fullness, you'll be ready. You won't be performing anymore. You won't be posturing. You won't be trying to hide your story behind this mask of capability. Instead, now you'll be open. You'll be honest. You'll be rooted in yourself. And that's the kind of connection that changes lives. It's a strange kind of grief when you're mourning something that no one else has recognized as real. And yet, this is the hidden burden so many of us are carrying. It's It's a grief without witness, right? A pain that doesn't have acknowledgement, or a history that doesn't have any context. And because no one else names it, we start erasing it as well. We start editing ourselves before we speak. We swallow our reactions that feel too much. We doubt legitimacy of our own suffering, and before long we're living a half-life. We're functioning, yes, but we're not flourishing. And this is why so many people break down during seemingly small moments. A song, perhaps, that triggers tears that you did not know you needed to cry, or a stranger's kindness that hits harder than you anticipated it would, a conversation that unexpectedly opened up a door that you had thought was long sealed. See, these are the moments when the pain that you've carried alone starts to try and surface, because it's desperate to be seen and to be known and to be metabolized. And too often, our first instinct is shove it right back down, right? Distract, apologize, try to make it more palatable and not so serious. But what if we didn't do that? What if we could just let the pain be? What if we didn't try to make it smaller or cleaner or even quieter? What if we gave ourselves permission to feel it fully? Not for pity, not for drama, but just for the sake of truth. Because when pain is denied, it doesn't disappear. It disfigures, it warps our sense of ourself, it alters the way we trust and the way we connect and the way we love. But when pain is acknowledged, genuinely and gently, without any agenda, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a site of power, a tenderness, a place of depth. That unacknowledged pain that you carry, it may be the very place where the most meaningful connections are meant to grow from, right? Not in spite of the pain, but through it. Because the people you are meant to journey with, those will really see you, and they will honor you, and they will never ask you to hide your story. They won't flinch at your scars. They won't try to rush you through your process. They'll say, tell me more. I want to understand what shaped you. And they'll say, you don't have to carry this alone anymore. But for that kind of connection to find you, you must first stop abandoning yourself. You must first become the kind of person who sees your own story as worthwhile, even if others never have. And this doesn't mean that you owe everyone an explanation. It doesn't mean that you're broadcasting your pain for attention. It means, though, that you're holding yourself with honesty. It means that you're meeting the parts of you that are still hurting, and you're saying, I see you. I believe what you've gone through, and I'm not leaving this space. Because the truth is, healing does not start with someone else. And it doesn't start when someone else finally gets it. Healing starts when you make space for yourself, when you stop outsourcing your worth to those who could never handle your truth. It starts when you stop measuring your pain against someone else's comfort level. When you stop needing unanimous approval before you can believe that what you went through actually mattered. So, if you're still carrying the pain that no one in your life really acknowledges, this is not your fault. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're not too sensitive. You're just simply unfinished. You're unwitnessed. You're unheard in the ways that mattered the most. And the work now is not to keep pushing that pain away, but to make room for it, to allow it to exist, to allow it to have space in all of its complexity. This is what I've come to believe that intimacy is truly about. It's not just sharing your joys, but also being willing to share your wounds. Not just being known for your strengths, but also being held in your weaknesses as well. Not just being admired when you're on the top, right? But also being loved when you're in pieces, falling apart. And integrity isn't always about just being fine. It's about refusing to live divided, about telling the truth of who you are, especially to yourself, even when that truth is raw and ragged and inconvenient. Because when you live that way, when you stop performing your healing and start inhabiting your own story, you begin to attract a different kind of community. You begin to recognize those who aren't afraid of your messiness. And you begin to walk away from spaces that demand your silence. See, in these spaces, you begin to trust that your pain is not a liability, but a sacred part of your becoming. And yes, some people will assuredly fall away. Some relationships won't survive the version of you that's honest. But when you gain, what you're going to gain in the aftermath is irreplaceable. You're going to gain your peace back. You're going to gain alignment. You're going to gain the kind of connection that doesn't ask you to disappear in order for you to belong. And slowly you start to experience what so many of us have spent a lifetime searching for, and that is the freedom of being fully known, the relief of being fully seen, the power of being fully yourself. So if you're carrying that pain that no one in your life really knows about or acknowledges, let this be your reminder. Your story is not too much, and your feelings are not too big. Your healing does not have to wait for anyone else's approval, because you are allowed to grieve. You are allowed to feel, and you are allowed to exist out loud, in color, without the need for any apology. And in doing so, you become the kind of presence that gives others permission to also do the same. You become this mirror for truth. You become a model for authenticity, a soft landing for those souls that are still hiding behind their own silence. This is how we heal, one honest presence at a time. Thank you for listening through. Sorry about the train in the last moment. And for those of you who love my glasses, I'm trying to showcase them. I'll see you in the next episode.